Okay, good morning, everyone. I had the privilege of learning with you last year. I think it was almost exactly a year ago. It was Erev Parashat Pinchas. Then we met in the shul in Bet Knesset Nitzanim in Yerushalayim. Because of the circumstances, we're meeting on Zoom this time. And Be'ezrat Hashem, we should be able to get back again to meeting face to face, and this crazy business should be behind us. I wanted to learn with you this morning. This Shabbat, Be'ezrat Hashem, we are finishing Sefer Bamidbar, and we're also in the midst of the 3 weeks, Yemei Ben HaMitzarim, the days between Yud Zayin B'Tammuz and Tisha B'Av. And we're thinking about Chorban HaBayit and the causes for Chorban HaBayit and what we can do in order to see Binyan Bet HaMikdash HaShlishi. We're also living in times where we see leaders. We experienced a president, a Nasi Medina in prison, prime minister in prison. Now, many other stories that many of our leaders are going through, and it's a good time to learn a lesson in leadership. I thought maybe to look at different episodes, different stories that we saw in Sefer Bamidbar and elsewhere in Chumash, elsewhere in Tanakh, to look close up at different leaders of Am Yisrael and to see what lesson we can learn from them. So we'll begin with the Hakdama that the Nitziv, Rav Naftali Tzvi Yehuda Berlin, in his Chumash Hamek Davar, his Perush Hamek Davar, he writes an introduction for Sefer Bereshis. And he brings that Chazal calls Sefer Bereshit Sefer HaYashar. זה הספר, ספר בראשית, נקרא בפי הנביאים, ספר הישר. And he brings that it's based on a pasuk in Yoshua, הלא היא כתובה על ספר הישר, so too in Sefer Shmuel, it says, ויאמר ללמד בני יהודה קשת, הנה היא כתובה על ספר הישר. And it's referring to Sefer Bereshit. Why is Sefer Bereshit called Sefer HaYashar? ומפרש רבי יוחנן, זה ספר אברהם, יצחק ויעקב שנקראו ישרים, שנאמר תמות נפשי מות ישרים. So Sefer Bereshis describes the lives of our forefathers Avraham, Yitzchak, and Yaakov, and they were Yisharim. They were straight people. Who was the first one that called them Yisharim? Dafka Bilam. Bilam says, Tamut nafshi mot yisharim, and he's referring to Avraham, Yitzchak, Yaakov. Says the Nitziv, v'yesh lahavin hatam lama kara Bilam et avotenu b'shem yisharim biyichud. Why did Bilam choose this name of Yisharim? Why does he describe them dafka as Yisharim? V'lo tzadikim or chasidim. He could have described them with many other adjectives. Why dafka Yesharim? Why not tzadikim? Why not chasidim? What does it mean to be yashar? V'gam lama mechuneh ze sefer biyichud b'kinu Yesharim? And why is it that this sefer of Bereshis is called Sefer HaYashar? Ubilam itpalel al atzmo sheyeh acharito kumo ba'alei ze hakinui. And Bilam, his desire is Tamut nafshi mot yisharim. He wants that his end of life should end up like those that were the yisharim. What does it mean to be a yashar? Says the Nitziv, v'ha'inyan, v'nitpa'er b'shirat ha'azinu. Sefer Dvarim, shirat ha'azinu, ala pasuk, hatzur tamim pa'alo, tzadik v'yashar hu. HaKadosh Baruch Hu is tzaddik v'yashar. What does that mean? What is tzaddik? What is yashar? Says the Nitziv, Deshevach yashar. This adjective. This word yashar, hu ne'emar lahatzdik din HaKadosh Baruch Hu b'churban bayit sheni. He says this is a reference to justify the act of HaKadosh Baruch Hu in churban bayit sheni. What does that mean? Shayad dor ikesh uptaltol. It was a very special, unique type of generation then at the time of Bayit Sheni. What was so special? Upirashnu, says the Netziv, we explained elsewhere, Shahayu tzadikim v'chasidim v'amalei Torah. In the time of Bayit Sheni, right, we know the Bayit Rishon was destroyed because of Shalosh Averot Chamurot, Avodah Zarah, Gilui Arayot, v'Shlichut Damim. That was Bayit Rishon. But Bayit Sheni, they were tzaddikim, hayu chasidim, hayu amelei Torah. They devoted their lives to learning. They were tzaddikim. So why was Bayit Sheni destroyed? Says the Netziv, the reason is they were tzaddikim, they were chasidim, they were amelei Torah, but what were they not? Ach lo hayu yisharim b'halichat olamam. They weren't yisharim in their behavior. And he explains, Al kain mipnei sinat chinam shebelibam ze et ze chashdu et mi shera'u shenoheg shelo keda'atam birat Hashem shehu tzduki v'apikares. So they were tzaddikim, they were chasidim, they learned Torah. But what was the problem? If they saw someone that was Oved Hashem slightly differently than the way they thought was right, so what did they say to him? You're an apikares. You hate HaKadosh Baruch Hu. What are you doing? And they reached a level of sinat chinam. Anyone that had a little bit of a different outlook, so he was a tztuki, he was an apikares, ובא על ידי זה לידי שפיכות דמים בדרך הפלגה ולכל הרעות שבעולם עד שחרב הבית. And this sinat chinam that they had, that led to all the terrible things, and that led ultimately to churban habayit. ועל זה היה צידוק הדין. And therefore HaKadosh Baruch Hu is saying, you know what caused the destruction? The fact that I, HaKadosh Baruch Hu, I am tzaddik, but I'm also yashar. It's not enough to be a tzaddik. You have to be yashar. And look at the words of the Netziv. Very powerful words. HaKadosh Baruch Hu yasharu ve'eno sovel tzaddikim ka'elu. HaKadosh Baruch Hu is yashar and he can't stand tzaddikim that are not yasharim. Only what type of tzaddikim does he want? Ba'ofen sheholchim b'derech hayashar gam b'halichot olam v'lo ba'aknimut. He doesn't want people that behave crookedly. Ela af agav shehu l'shem shamayim. Even if they're doing things ki'ilu l'shem shamayim, if they're not yashar, ze gorem churban habri'ah v'harisut yishuv haaretz. If you're not yashar, it could cause the destruction of the whole world. And he continues, V'zeh haya shevach ha'avot, and this was the praise of the avot, shel milvad shayu tzadikim v'chasidim. Not only were they tzadikim, were they righteous, not only were they ohavei Hashem ba'ofen hayoter efshar, but beyond that, od hayu yisharim. And what does it mean to be yisharim, says the Netziv? Hainu sheitnagu im umot ha'olam. They behaved and they treated the goyim afilu ovdei elilin mechuarim, even idol worshippers, mechuarim, despicable idol worshippers. How did they treat them? Mikol makom hayu imam be'ahava v'chashu letobatam, and they had good relations with them, and they looked at, they wanted their benefit. Why? Ba'ashehu kiyum habriya, because that's what keeps the world going. And where do we see that? Says the Netziv, K'moshe anu ro'im kama hishtateach Avraham Avinu litpalel al Sdom. Avraham Avinu goes out of his way to beg and to daven for Sdom. Af agav shaya soneh otam et malkam tachlit sina avur ishatam. Even though the king of Sdom, the people in Sdom, are the total opposite of what Avram Avinu stands for, and Avram Avinu hates their behavior, but even so, he davens for the people. Mikol makom chafetz b'kiyumam. He doesn't want them to be destroyed. He wants them to continue living, even though he has arguments with them, even though he doesn't agree with what they're doing, but he doesn't want that they should be destroyed. So we see, Bayit Sheni, says the Netziv, was destroyed even though they were tzaddikim, even though they were chasidim, even though they were amelei Torah, they were not yesharim. They hated each other. They didn't have tolerance to one another. Sefer Bereshis is the Sefer of the Yesharim. They behaved with tolerance even for Ovdei Elilim Mechorim. And the Netziv mentioned Avram Avinu's, the way that he went out of his way to daven for the welfare and to save Sdom. And the Chassam Sofer, in his Shailus and Shuvas, there's an Hakdama for the Shuvas Chassam Sofer, Chelik Yoredea. And in that Hakdama, he says something fascinating. He says that when HaKadosh Baruch Hu comes to destroy Sodom, so the Pasuk says, HaMechaseh ani ma'Avraham et asher ani oseh b'Sodom. HaKadosh Baruch Hu says to himself, so to speak, could I hide back? Could I hold back from Avraham? Could I cover from him, to hide from Avram Avinu what I'm about to do in Sodom? I can't hide it from him. I must tell Avram Avinu what's about to happen in Sodom. Why? Why does HaKadosh Baruch Hu say that he has to share and to reveal to Avram Avinu what he's about to do with Sodom? Says HaKadosh Baruch Hu, the reason is, Ki yeda'ativ, leman asher yitzaveh et banav ve'et beito acharav v'shamru derech Hashem lasot tzedakah u'mishpat. Says Hashem, I have to reveal to Avram Avinu, he has to be known to him what's about to happen in Sodom. Why? Why is it so important? Ki yeda'ativ, because I know Avram Avinu. Leman asher yitzaveh et banav et beito acharav, because he commands his children and his household, he educates them, v'shamru derech Hashem, and they keep to the path of Hashem, lasot tzedakah u'mishpat. So since Avram Avinu is teaching his children, he's teaching his family to behave in to behave in a straight path, to behave properly, that's why I have to reveal to Avram Avinu what's about to happen in Sodom. What does one thing have to do with the other? The fact that Avram Avinu is mechanech his children properly, so therefore he has to know what's happening in Sodom? Says the Chassam Sofer, unbelievable, that Avram Avinu, he looked in the generations before him, and he saw what happened in the world in the time of Noach, that the world was kimat totally destroyed, even though there was a tremendous tzaddik in the world. Noach ish tzaddik tamim haya b'dorotav. There was a tremendous tzaddik that the Torah, HaKadosh Baruch Hu himself, tells us that Noach was a tzaddik. Halavai, that HaKadosh Baruch Hu should say to me that I'm a tzaddik. HaKadosh Baruch Hu tells us about Noach. Ish tzaddik tamim haya b'dorosav. Et Elokim italech Noach. So there's this tremendous tzaddik walking around in the world, but did that help the generation of Dor HaMabel? The fact that they had a Noach there? No, they were all destroyed. Why did that happen? How could it be that there's such a tzaddik, and even so, the world is brought to destruction? Also, before the time of Avram Avinu, there was a person called Chanoch. And the Torah tells us about Chanoch, ve'einenu ki lakachoto Elokim. He was taken by HaKadosh Baruch Hu. In other words, Chanoch was such a holy person, he became so close to HaKadosh Baruch Hu, that HaKadosh Baruch Hu took him out of this world even before he died, because he was so holy that he couldn't stay in this physical world. So Avraham Avinu says to himself, look what happened in generations, in previous generations. There was a person named Chanoch. He was a tremendous tzaddik. Was he able to influence the world? Was he able to save the world? No. There was a tremendous tzaddik. His name was Noach. HaKadosh Baruch Hu himself tells us what a tzaddik he was. Was he able to save the world? Was he able to influence the world? He didn't do it. Avraham Avinu reaches the conclusion, that's not what HaKadosh Baruch Hu wants from me. Yes, if I'll cut myself off from the people around me, and I devote myself only to my personal spiritual growth, so I will reach tremendous levels of Kedusha. I will reach tremendous closeness to HaKadosh Baruch Hu. But what's going to be with the people around me? They'll stay at the low level that they are. That's not what HaKadosh Baruch Hu wants. HaKadosh Baruch Hu has enough malachim in Shamayim. He doesn't need another angel. What HaKadosh Baruch Hu needs is a person that's going to devote his life educating others. But if you're going to devote your life to be mashpia, to influence others, it's going to come on your own account. That time that you're going to invest in teaching others, you could have invested in yourself to reach higher levels of Kedusha, to become a greater Talmid Chacham. So you're investing time in others at your own expense. So what's better? For example, if we have a group of 10 people, and each person could reach their potential in Kedusha, in Ruchnius, to 100%. What's better? Is it better that the 9 people should reach a level of 10% and one of them should reach a level of 100%? He'll be 100%, he'll ignore everyone else, they'll stay at the low level of 10%. So we'll have 9 people that are each one 10%, that's 90, plus him who's 100, so we reached 190. As far as the Kodesh Baruch Hu is concerned, so to speak. Or, if I don't reach 100%, I'll reach only 80%, but I'll make sure that everyone else around me will reach 50, 60%. So for HaKadosh Baruch Hu, he wants that so much more. And that's what Avraham Avinu did. Let's read the words of the Chassam Sofer. Says the Chassam Sofer, Hora b'zeh, ki niflet ahavat Hashem la'Avraham Avinu alav hashalom. Avraham Avinu had tremendous love to HaKadosh Baruch Hu. The pasuk says, Avraham ohavi. Abraham, he was Hashem's beloved. Why did Hashem love Avraham Avinu so much? Niflet ahavat Hashem la'Avraham Avinu alav hashalom, al shelimeh da'at et ha'am v'kirvam la'avodato. Hashem loves Avraham Avinu so much because he didn't only care about himself, but he cared about the people around him. V'hi she'amda lo yoter mikol ma'aseh ha'tov u'zchut ha'nefesh asher haya lo la'atzmo. And that was more valuable in the eyes to HaKadosh Baruch Hu, the fact that he invested time in others. That was more important to HaKadosh Baruch Hu than the levels of Kedusha that Avraham Avinu himself reached. Ki be'emet gam nefanav hayu yechidei zgula asher yadu et Hashem v'dat drachav yechpetzu ba'avato yishku tamid. Because even before the time of Avraham Avinu, there were people that reached great levels of Abbas Hashem. Mi lanu gadol mi Chanoch. Who could be greater than Chanoch? Hashem me'otzem tshukato v'dveikuto b'Hashem. And because of this tremendous love and clinging to HaKadosh Baruch Hu, mitparda chavila chevrat arba yesodot. So he was such a holy person that he couldn't stay in this physical world. Chadal miot adam. He seized on being a human being. And he went up to becoming an angel in heaven. As the pasuk says, God took him to be another angel in heaven. We don't find in regards to Avraham Avinu that he reached such levels of Kedusha like Chanoch did. So is Chanoch a greater person than Avraham Avinu? Says the Chassam Sofer, no. אך לא מצד פחיתות וחיסרון נפשו לא הגיע למעלה הזאת. לא. It's not that Avraham Avinu was on a lower level and that's why he couldn't reach such high levels of Kedusha. That's not the case. כי אם Avraham Avinu alav hashalom haya oseh kasher asa Chanoch. Because if Avraham Avinu would have behaved like Chanoch and he would have done what Chanoch did, in other words, להתבודד עצמו מחברת בני אדם, if he would have separated himself from society, so then he too, התעלה גם הוא להיות מלאכי אל, he also could have reached the level to be like an angel. So why didn't he do that? ואשר לא עשה כן, the reason he didn't do that is, הוא התבונן בחוכמתו, כי לא באלה חפץ השם. That's not what Hashem wants. שישלים האדם את נפשו לבד, that a person should be alone, perfect, ואת אנשי דורו ישאיר אחריו תרבות אנשים חטאים ומכעיסי השם. To work on yourself, to become like an angel, and to not care about the people around you, that's not what Hashem wants. That's what happened to the generation of Chanoch, for the generation of Noach, Dor Mabul. But that's not what Hashem wants. Hanisayon hazeh, this lesson that he learned from history, limedoto, taught Avraham Avinu, ki tov la'adam lema'et ba'ashlamat nafsho, leman ribot kvod Hashem. It's better that a person should maybe diminish a bit his own perfection in order laharbot kvod Hashem, that in the big picture there should be more kvod shamayim, lema'et et mordav v'laharbot avadav v'yodav, to minimize those that rebel HaKadosh Baruch Hu and enhance those that serve HaKadosh Baruch Hu. Ki ma yitenu ma yosif ha'adam im yosif malach echad al alfei ribavot malachei malach. Because what is it good for HaKadosh Baruch Hu that a person should add one more malach? There's so many malachim in Shamayim. And therefore, says the Chassam Sofer, why is it that HaKadosh Baruch Hu had to appear to Avraham Avinu and to tell Avraham Avinu what's about to happen in stone? How come Avraham Avinu didn't know on his own what's about to happen? Wasn't Avraham Avinu a Navi? Wasn't he a prophet? Aren't prophets supposed to know what's going to happen in the future? Why did HaKadosh Baruch Hu have to get involved, especially to tell Avraham Avinu what's about to happen? How come Avraham Avinu didn't know? Says the Chassam Sofer, you know what? You know why he didn't know? Because it seems that the level of nevuah that Avraham Avinu had maybe was not the highest level of nevuah. And that's why Avraham Avinu on his own didn't know what's about to happen in stone. But says HaKadosh Baruch Hu, it's not fair. How come he didn't reach such levels of nevuah? Because he didn't only focus on himself. He devoted himself for others. And if he's devoting himself for others because he came to the conclusion that that's what HaKadosh Baruch Hu wants, because it's best for HaKadosh Baruch Hu to have a multitude of Ovdei Hashem instead of having one perfect Ovdei Hashem like Avraham Avinu. Avraham Avinu reached the conclusion that that's not what HaKadosh Baruch Hu wants. It didn't work for Chanoch. It didn't work for Noach. They weren't able to save their generation. And therefore, Avraham Avinu devoted himself to teaching others. And Avraham Avinu's Talmidim were not the highest level. He had to teach them the basics. He had to teach them Aleph Beis. He dealt with people that are Ovdei Avodah Zarah. And for sure, it came at his own expense, and his level of nevuah was maybe not so great. And he finishes and he says, V'yan ki zacha Avraham Avinu, halav shalom lemidah zu, terem tziva Hashem alav. So even before HaKadosh Baruch Hu gave us the mitzvah of Ochiach Tochiach et Amitecha, even before HaKadosh Baruch Hu commanded us to look out for others, Avraham Avinu realized it on his own, that that's the benefit of HaKadosh Baruch Hu, and therefore he was called Avraham Ohavi. And therefore HaKadosh Baruch Hu decided that even though Avraham Avinu on his own isn't aware of what's about to happen to Sodom, says Avram Avinu, I must tell him. I must tell him, because the fact that he didn't get to it on his own is because he was concerned for HaKadosh Baruch Hu's benefit, so to speak. He was concerned in spreading Torah, in teaching and educating those around him. And with this idea, we could understand that when Avram Avinu comes to daven to HaKadosh Baruch Hu, and he comes to beg for protecting the people in Sodom, so Avram Avinu says to HaKadosh Baruch Hu, Ulayesh, I'm in source number 3 now, Ulayesh 50 tzadikim betoch ha'ir, ha'af tispeh velo tisal ha'makom leman 50 tzadikim asher b'kirba. Says Avram Avinu to HaKadosh Baruch Hu, maybe there are 50 tzadikim. But he doesn't say maybe there are 50 tzadikim. He knows that 50 tzadikim are not good enough. Because Hanoch wasn't good enough. Even though he was a tremendous tzaddik, he couldn't protect his generation. Noach was a tremendous tzaddik, but he couldn't protect his generation. And therefore, Avram Avinu, when he speaks to HaKadosh Baruch Hu, he stresses, I'm not only looking for tzaddikim, I know tzaddikim alone are not enough. But what am I looking for? Ulayet 50 tzaddikim betoch ha'ir. Maybe there are 50 tzaddikim asher bekirba, tzaddikim in its midst. What does it mean, tzaddikim betoch ha'ir? What does it mean, tzaddikim bekirba? Says the Ibn Ezra, and I thank my father, Shlita, for teaching me this Ibn Ezra. Says the Ibn Ezra, Vitam betoch ha'ir. Why does Avram Avinu stress tzaddikim betoch ha'ir? Says the Ibn Ezra, Shehem Yireim et Hashem b'farhesia, that they're over Hashem in public, not closed in their home with their shutters down where no one could see them and they're focused on themselves. No, we're looking for tzaddikim betoch ha'ir, Shehem Odem et Hashem b'farhesia. Says the Ibn Ezra, V'chen, as we find in the pasuk in Yirmiyah, it says there, Shotetu b'chutzot Yerushalayim. Next source, I bring the full pasuk in Yirmiyah. Yirmiyah, before, by the time of Churban Bayis Rishon, he says, Shotetu b'chutzot Yerushalayim, Ureuna, so wander amongst the streets of Yerushalayim, Ureuna ud'u uvakshu b'rechovotea, and search in its streets. Go to the outskirts and the streets of Yerushalayim, im timtze'u ish, im yesh osem mishpat mevakesh emunah. If you find a tzaddik who behaves, he's osem mishpat, he's behaving just, and he's mevakesh emunah, he has emunah on HaKadosh Baruch Hu. If we find even one of those, ve'eslachla, and I'll forgive them, and there won't be Churban Bayis Rishon. Says the Radak there on Yirmiyah, what does it mean? B'chutzot Yerushalayim u'bakshu b'rechovotea. It's not enough to find a tzaddik within Yerushalayim. If he's closed in his home and he has no influence, he's not going to be able to save Yerushalayim. He has to be b'rechovotea. He has to be b'chutzot Yerushalayim. Says the Radak, Piresh Adoni Avizal, Ki Yirmiyah amar b'chutzot Yerushalayim v'amar b'rechovotea. Why? Because the Hasidim that existed in Yerushalayim at the time of Bayis Rishon, there were Hasidim there, but they were hayumit chabim bebatehem. They were hiding at home. So they were tzaddikim on their own in their homes. They were scared to go out. They didn't go out. They didn't go out to influence others. Says the Radak, maybe they did it because they were scared that the Rishayim would harm them. But the bottom line is that they were tzaddikim, but they were tzaddikim in their homes. They weren't tzaddikim in chutzot Yerushalayim. They weren't tzaddikim in the rechovot. They weren't out there in the streets. They weren't having an influence. The Radak in Bereshis on tzaddikim betoch ha'ir says the same idea that the Radak said on Yirmiyah. Says the Radak in regards to tzaddikim betoch ha'ir, and he says, "Umasha Omaru bikshu berechovotea mevakesh emunah v'slach la hayu bahem tzaddikim ba'atzmam." They were tzaddikim in Yerushalayim. They were tzaddikim for themselves. Aval hashiv achirim ma'avon, but to have influence on others, to to set them straight. But they weren't willing to get out of their homes and to go to the streets and to have influence on others. It's true. Why did they not do that? They were scared to be killed. You're right. They were scared that they would be harmed if they went out and the Rishonim would catch them, trying to influence others to do tshuva. But what HaKadosh Baruch Hu wants, says the Radak, is that tzaddik will be willing to be moser nefesh. He'll be willing to risk his life in order to influence others. And if there would be a tzaddik that would be willing to be moser nefesh to influence others, so there would not have been a churban. That tzaddik would have the merit to save everyone else. And therefore, when Avram Avinu comes to daven for the welfare of Sodom, he knows that it's not enough that there should be tzaddikim. There have to be tzaddikim betoch ha'ir, tzaddikim that are willing to leave their homes, to go out to the streets, to be involved with the people. But it's going to come on their own expense. They'll reach lower levels of kedusha. They'll reach lower levels of nevuah. So what? Are you in it for yourself? Or you're in it for HaKadosh Baruch Hu's sake? If you're in it for yourself, okay, so you could become a malach, like Chanoch. You could be like Noach, but you're not going to save the world. If you want to save the world for HaKadosh Baruch Hu's sake, you have to be willing to even to forgo on a certain level that you could have reached yourself in order to take care of the welfare of the public. So here we see that this is the lesson that we learn from Avram Avinu. We learn from Avram Avinu that in order to be a true leader, in order to be able to protect your generation, you have to be willing to have Mesirus Nefesh. And not only Mesirus Nefesh, but you have to be willing not only to be killed in order to take care of the tzibur, but you have to be willing to sacrifice your spiritual growth as well. There's a famous story told that when the Balatanya lived in the house together with his son, the Rebbe Baruch there, and one day the Balatanya's son was sitting and learning, and he was already a father, and he's sitting and learning, and the baby, the infant, was lying in his carriage, in his crib, and the Rebbe was so engrossed in his learning that he didn't realize that the baby fell out of it. He was standing up and playing, and he fell out of his crib. The baby fell out of his crib, and he's crying and screaming. And the Balatanya, he lived upstairs, and he was also learning, but he hears the baby crying. So he goes downstairs to see what's happening. And he sees that his son is learning, and he's so engrossed in his learning that he's not even aware that his baby is on the floor crying because the baby fell out of the crib. So the Rebbe Balatanya picked up his grandson, and he calmed him down, and he sang to him until he stopped crying, and he put him back in the crib. Later on, when he was talking with his son, he gave him Musar, and he said, what is your learning worth if you're so engrossed in your learning, you're so involved in your learning, and you don't even hear a baby crying next to you? So what is your learning worth? And the last Lubavitcher Rebbe, Menachem Mendel Schneerson, he wrote a letter one year for the Hasidim before Yat Kislev, and he brought this story. And he says, we learn from this story that even if a person is involved in spiritual growth, he's involved in the most important things, he can't ignore the crying of a baby around him. And the Lubavitcher Rebbe said the crying of the baby doesn't have to be the physical cry of an infant that fell out of his crib. Says the Lubavitcher Rebbe, there are many Jews that fell out of the crib of Yiddishkeit. or maybe they weren't in the kriv of Yiddishkeit to begin with. And maybe they're not crying with tears because they're not even aware of what they're lacking. But it's our job, he says, to be aware of and to be involved and to even close our Gemara if that's what's needed in order to go out and to take care of those crying. We can't only close ourselves in our homes, in our base medrash, and take care of our own spiritual welfare. We have to be involved with those around us. This is the message, the lesson that we learn from Avram Avinu. But of course, it's not only Avram Avinu that behaved in this way. Throughout Sefer Bamidbar, we read a lot about Moshe Rabbeinu and Moshe and Aaron. And in Sefer Shmos, HaKadosh Baruch Hu tells Moshe Rabbeinu, that it's time in Parshas Tetzaveh, after during the building of the Mishkan, and the Kohanim, they're going to be the ones that are going to be offering the sacrifice. They're going to be makriv the korbanos in the Mishkan. And there was a whole procedure that had to be done in order to prepare the Kohanim for the avoda in the Mishkan. And the Torah tells us that HaKadosh Baruch Hu told Moshe, part of the process in preparing the Kohanim for the avoda was to take a bull, to shecht the bull, and to take the blood of the bull and to sprinkle the blood on the Kohanim. And the Torah tells us that HaKadosh Baruch Hu was supposed to take Aaron, to sprinkle the blood on Aaron's ear, on his right earlobe, and then to sprinkle the blood on the ear of his sons. And then to sprinkle blood on Aaron's thumb and on the thumb of his sons. And then to sprinkle the blood on Aaron's toe, and then the toe of his sons. Okay, so the process was to take the blood, to sprinkle on 3 body parts, the ear, thumb, and toe. Each body part first, Aaron and then his sons. The next one, Aaron and his sons, Aaron and his sons. That's what HaKadosh Baruch Hu told Moshe in Parshas Tetzaveh in Sefer Shmos. In the Sefer Vayikra, Parshas Tzav, that's where the Torah describes what Moshe Rabbeinu actually did. And if you look at the psukim there, it's clear that Moshe Rabbeinu changed from the tzivui of HaKadosh Baruch Hu. And instead of taking Aaron, sprinkling it on his ear, and then the ear of his sons, and then his thumb, and then his sons, that's not what Moshe Rabbeinu did. Rather, what did Moshe Rabbeinu do? He took Aaron, he sprinkled the blood on Aaron's ear, his thumb, and his toe, and only after he completed and finished sprinkling the blood on Aaron did he move on to sprinkle the blood on Aaron's sons. Ask the Netziv, why did Moshe Rabbeinu change from the tzivui? Why did he finish with Aaron and only then move on to his sons? That's not what Hashem told him to do. Hashem told him each body part, first Aaron, then his sons. Then the next body part, Aaron and his sons. Why did he finish and complete Aaron? He sprinkled the blood on him totally, and only then did he move on to his sons. Why did he change from the tzivui? Says the Netziv, what happened between Sefer Shmos Parshas Tetzaveh and Sefer Vayikra Parshas Tzav? What major occurrence took place? Says the Netziv, after Parshas Tetzaveh comes Parshas Kisisa. Parshas Kisisa is Chet HaEgel. As a result of Chet HaEgel, Moshe Rabbeinu realized that he has to give special respect to Aaron. And he expressed that special respect by sprinkling the blood on Aaron completely, and only then moving on to his sons. We'll see it in the words in the Netziv in source number 8. V'yesh lo osif, v'maaseh ha'egel shaya ben hatzivui v'ha'maaseh. The egel, which took place between the tzivui, the commandment, which as we said was in Parshas Tetzaveh, and the maaseh, and the actual performance of that tzivui, which took place in Parshas Tzav, in between was Maaseh HaEgel, and that was what garam ladavar. That's what changed That's what caused Moshe Rabbeinu to change from the tzibur. And he says, "The lifnei maaseh ha'egel hayu Aaron ubanav shavin b'skulat ha'kihuna." Before the Maaseh ha'egel, Aaron and his sons, they were all equal. They were on the same level. So why was Aaron chosen to be the Kohen Gadol? Rak mishum shaya avihem v'gadol mehem haya Kohen Gadol. He was the father. He was the older one. So they gave him the respect and they appointed him the Kohen Gadol. But not that he was in a tremendous, a different level than them. They're basically the same level. Aval, that was true up to the Egel. Aval la'achar ha'egel, shemasar nafsho al Yisrael. But after the Egel, that Aaron was willing to be moser nefesh for Am Yisrael, kamivur barabba, as is explained in Medrash Rabbah, shimshil liben shechatar achar beit aviv hamelech. Amalo padagogo lama ze ateyagea ten li v'ani achtor. Right, the Medrash brings a mashal for a son that wants to rebel against his father, the king, and he wants to dig a tunnel in order to go and to harm his father, to rebel against his father. And the son of the king has a pedagogue, has a teacher. And the teacher says to the son, you know what, why should you dirty yourself with the digging? I'll dig for you. And then the king catches him, and the king says to the teacher, I know why you did this. You did this to protect my son. You didn't want me to get angry at my son, and you said, I'll dig instead of you, so that if the king catches us, he'll put his anger out on me and not on you. So I understand, says the king to the pedagogue, you only did this out of your love for my son to protect him. Says the Netziv, Kach Aaron, so to Aaron. Even though Aaron had an active part in making the Egel, Mikol Makom Yada Kadosh Baruch Hu Shurak Mishum Ahavat Yisrael. Kadosh Baruch Hu knows that he only did it out of his tremendous love. Shemasar Nafsho V'Nishmato B'Shvilam. Aaron was willing not only to be Moser Nefesh, but even more than that, he was willing to be Moser Neshama. He was willing to give up his spiritual well-being in order to protect Am Yisrael. And therefore, says the Netziv, Mishum Hachi Migia Lo B'Yichud HaKihuna Gdola. And therefore, Aaron earned the Kahuna Gdola. Right? There's the famous joke of the person that comes to the rabbi and he says, Rabbi, I don't care what it takes. I don't care how much it costs. You must make me a Kohen. And the rabbi says, you know, to be a Kohen, that's a tremendous kavod. You go up first to the Torah, the Levim wash your hands, you stand in front of the congregation giving blessings. That's a tremendous kavod. It's going to cost you a lot of money. He says, Rabbi, I don't care what it costs. Make me a Kohen. So the rabbi says, okay, donate $1 million to the shul and we'll make it happen. He writes out the check. The rabbi brings the holy waters, sprinkles it on his head, and he says, okay, you're a Kohen. But the rabbi says, but tell me, why was it so important for you to be a Kohen? So he says, my father was a Kohen, my grandfather was a Kohen, my whole life I've been dreaming to be a Kohen. So we know that that's ridiculous. Either you're born a Kohen or you're not. But there were two people in history that were not born Kohanim, and they acquired the kahuna during their life. Right? We know there were many Kohanim that acquired and paid money to become a Kohen Gadol. But how do you become a Kohen when your father was not a Kohen? There were two people in history that were not born Kohanim, they became Kohanim. Who were they? Aaron a Kohen, right? Amram, his father was not a Kohen, and all of a sudden Aaron becomes a Kohen. And also Pinchas, like we read last Shabbos. So what did they pay? How do you acquire kahuna? Says the Netziv, you know how you acquire kahuna? You know how you become a Kohen? You have to be willing to be moser, not only your nefesh, but to be moser neshama. When Aaron was willing to get involved in the Egel, because he realized that that's the only hope to save Klal Yisrael. I'll get involved with the Egel, and I'll try to delay it. And in the meantime, Moshe Rabbeinu will come, and that's how I'll save them. He's taking a risk here, because he's getting involved, and maybe the Egel will be ready before Moshe comes. And that's what actually happens. And they say to the Egel, Eila Elohecha Yisrael. And they committed to a terrible sin. But why does Aaron do it? Because he has tremendous love for Klal Yisrael. And when he realizes that that's the only hope to save them, so he's willing to take the chance. Says the Netziv, when Moshe Rabbeinu saw that Aaron was completely and totally devoted for Klal Yisrael, he's willing to forgo his physical welfare in this world, and is willing to forgo on his spiritual welfare in the world to come. He's moser not only nefesh, but his neshama also. Says the Netziv, that's why Moshe Rabbeinu decided to sprinkle the blood totally on Aaron, and only when he finished with Aaron did he sprinkle the blood on his sons to show that Aaron HaKohen wasn't chosen to be a Kohen Gadol because he's the father. It's much more than that. He was chosen to be the Kohen Gadol because he's the only one that had tremendous devotion, Mesirus Neshama. That's how you acquire to become a Kohen. That's the price you have to pay to become a Kohen Gadol. The Netziv says at the end that Aaron was a Kohen Yoter mi Pinchas. We saw last Shabbos that Pinchas also acquired kahuna because he was willing to be moser nefesh, and there was a magefa in Am Yisrael, and he goes and he kills Zimri, but he's taking a chance because he could be killed. And when Pinchas is willing to be moser nefesh, so that's how he acquires the kahuna. But the Netziv says that Aaron was a greater level than Pinchas. Aaron yiterasa limsor nishmato b'shvilam. Pinchas, says the Netziv, was willing to be moser nefesh. Pinchas was willing to be moser nefesh, but Aaron was even willing to be moser not only his nefesh, but also his neshama. But the truth is that the Meshech Chochmah says the same thing that Aaron did, the same thing exactly, Mesirus Nefesh and Mesirus Neshama, Pinchas does the exact same thing. Where do we see that Pinchas was willing to be moser his Neshama? Says the Meshech Chochmah last week's parsha, why does the Torah tell us that Pinchas was ben Elazar, ben Aaron? Why do we have to give the yichus back to Aaron? Says the Meshech Chochmah that Pinchas did two things. He did, first of all, he was willing to risk his life. He goes to kill Zimri, knowing that there's a chance that he himself will be killed. So Pinchas is willing to risk his physical life, but he does something else. Says the Meshech Chochmah Hasheni, the second thing that Pinchas does, Shehifkir et kol ha'olam haba v'kineh letovatam shel Yisrael. The second thing that Pinchas does is that he's willing to forgo on his place in Olam Haba. Pinchas is willing to give up on his Olam Haba for the benefit of Klal Yisrael. Where do we see that Pinchas is willing to give up on his Olam Haba? The Pasuk says in Tilim, Vayamod Pinchas vayifalel. And the Gemara says, Sha'asa plilutim kono. Pinchas comes to Shamayim, so to speak. He comes to Kadosh Baruch Hu, and he screams at HaKadosh Baruch Hu and says, Al eile yehargu kafdalid elef mi Yisrael. There are two people sinning, and because of these two people, 24,000 are being killed in the Magefa. Where's the justice to HaKadosh Baruch Hu? So Pinchas is talking harshly to HaKadosh Baruch Hu. And the Gemara says that the Malachim come to Pinchas and they say, what are you doing? You can't talk like that to HaKadosh Baruch Hu. You can't talk like that. And the Gemara says, Bikshu Malachei HaSharet ledochafo. They wanted to kick him out. They wanted to kick him out and that he should lose his place in Olam Haba. Says the Meshech Chochmah that when Pinchas does that, he's acting just like his grandfather Aaron. Aaron wanted to postpone them till the next day that Moshe Rabbeinu could come. So Asaha Egel, so he helped them prepare the Egel, and he said, Mutav yitlu asirachon bi. It's better HaKadosh Baruch Hu should be angry at me, Va'al Yavdu Yisrael, and he shouldn't destroy Am Yisrael. Harei mipnei to'aliyut Yisrael, for the benefit of Yisrael, hishlich kol chelko ba'olam haba la'avas Yisrael. So Aaron was willing to forgo on his place in Olam Haba for the benefit of Am Yisrael. So too Pinchas. Lachen yichaso hakatuv ben Aaron. Vayta lo lezaro acharav brit kunat olam tachat shekinei le'elokav. שהרג את ישראל עבור כבוד הקדוש ברוך הוא, ויכפר על בני ישראל, זה כפרת דברים שעשה פלילות עם קונו. That Pinchas was willing to argue with HaKadosh Baruch Hu and risk his place in Olam Haba, l'to'aliyut ha'umah, for the benefit of Am Yisrael and out of his tremendous love for them. So just like Aaron had tremendous love, and he was willing to sacrifice his own spiritual world for the benefit of Klal Yisrael, so too Pinchas was willing to sacrifice his spiritual world. Just like Avram Avinu was willing to sacrifice the levels of Ruchnius that he could have reached, he didn't do that because he was concerned for the benefit of mankind and for his generation. So too Aaron and Pinchas sacrificed their own spiritual welfare in order to take care and concern for the people, for Bnei Yisrael around them. So we see a common denominator between Aaron, between Pinchas, and between Avram Avinu. And of course, we find this phenomena by Moshe Rabbeinu as well. Because after Chet HaEgel, so HaKadosh Baruch Hu wants to destroy Klal Yisrael, Chas v'Shalom. And Moshe Rabbeinu davens and begs forgiveness from HaKadosh Baruch Hu that Hashem should forgive Am Yisrael. And the pasuk says there in Parashas Kisisa, Moshe Rabbeinu says to Hashem, Ve'ata, and now, im tisach hatatam, Hashem, if you forgive them, ve'im ayin, and if not, mecheni na misifrecha asher katafta. If you don't forgive them, erase me from your book, which you have written, erase me from the Torah. And this pasuk is a difficult pasuk. What does it mean? Ve'ata, and now, im tisach hatatam, if you forgive them, ve'im ayin, and if not, mecheni misifrecha asher katafta. So it's clear in the pasuk, Hashem, Moshe Rabbeinu is asking, Hashem, if you don't forgive Bnei Israel, so then please erase me from your book. But what is Moshe Rabbeinu asking on the chance that HaKadosh Baruch Hu will forgive them? V'ata im tisach hatatam, if you forgive them, so then what? The pasuk doesn't say. So Rashi says, V'ata im tisach hatatam, if you forgive them, harei tov, so then it's good. Eini omer lecha mecheni. So then I'm not going to ask you to erase me from your book. Ve'im ayin mecheni, only if you don't forgive them, so then erase me. Says Rashi, v'zeh mikra katzar. This is a short pasuk. It's ki'ilu that the pasuk is missing words. That the Torah leaves it up to us to add the missing words. V'ata im tisach hatatam, if you forgive them, so then eini omer lecha mecheni, then don't erase me. And only if you do forgive, if you don't forgive them, so then mecheni. That's how Rashi explains this pasuk. But there are other mefarshim that understand differently than Rashi. For example, the Malbim says no. The Malbim says, HaKadosh Baruch Hu is, Moshe Rabbeinu is davening to HaKadosh Baruch Hu, please forgive them. And then Moshe Rabbeinu says, Ve'ata, im tisach hatatam ve'im ayin. Whether you forgive them, or whether if not, I don't care if you forgive them or not, I have one request of you, HaKadosh Baruch Hu, and that is, mecheni misifrecha asher katafta. Right? The Malbim in his word says, Ritzonot amar, she'ata mitzidcha, you, HaKadosh Baruch Hu, you could be, yachol liyot shetisach hatatam, it could be that you'll forgive them. But, aval anochi, katzti b'chayai, va'avakesh shetimche shmi mesefer hachayim, ki tov moti mechayai, ubezeh masar et atzmo lemita. Says the Malbim, Moshe Rabbeinu says to HaKadosh Baruch Hu, I have one request, and that request I'm asking of you, whether you forgive them, and whether if not. I don't care if you forgive them or not, I want that I should be erased. And what does it mean? Mecheni misifrecha asher katafta. Misifrecha asher katafta does not only mean I should not be mentioned in the Sefer Torah. The Gemara in Rosh Hashanah learns from this pasuk, misifrecha asher katafta, The Gemara, everyone knows that at Rosh Hashanah, there's Shlosha Sfarim Niftachim. 3 books are opened in Rosh Hashanah, Sefer Shel Tzadikim, Sefer Shel Beinonim, Sefer Shel Rishonim. Says Moshe Rabbeinu, erase me from all 3. I don't want to be a tzaddik. I don't want to be a Beinoni. I don't even want to be a Rasha. I don't want to be anything. Why? Why is Moshe Rabbeinu saying this? So I heard a beautiful explanation. I heard it in the name of Rav Levi Yitzchak Schneerson, the father of the last Lubavitcher Rebbe. And he said that after Chet HaEgel, HaKadosh Baruch Hu comes to Moshe Rabbeinu and he says, Heref mimeni v'achalem. Let me be, I want to destroy Am Yisrael. So says Moshe Rabbeinu to HaKadosh Baruch Hu, you can't destroy Am Yisrael. We know that the whole purpose of the world, Bereshis bara Elokim es hashamayim v'haaretz, Bereshit b'shvil Yisrael shenikru Reshit. The whole creation was for Am Yisrael to be in the world. If there's not going to be an Am Yisrael in the world, so there's no purpose for the world. The world will go back to Tohu Vavohu. You can't destroy them. Says HaKadosh Baruch Hu to Moshe Rabbeinu, you know, you're right, I know that. I'll destroy them, but I'll leave you, because they all sinned with the Egel, but you didn't, Moshe Rabbeinu. So you're a tzaddik. I could leave you, and I'll start a new Am Yisrael through you, Moshe Rabbeinu. So Moshe Rabbeinu says to himself, so now I understand what's going on here. If I, Moshe Rabbeinu, would have sinned along with them, so then HaKadosh Baruch Hu cannot allow himself to destroy all of us, because if he destroys all of Klal Yisrael, so there's no continuation of the world. The world will go back to Tohu Vavohu. Only because they sinned and I didn't, so HaKadosh Baruch Hu could allow himself to destroy them because he has me to continue from. If that's the case, says Moshe Rabbeinu to himself, it could be that now I'll dive into HaKadosh Baruch Hu and he'll forgive them. But what's going to be in the future? What's the guarantee that in the future he'll also forgive them? Maybe now he'll forgive them, but I know this nation. I know them. They're going to sin again in the future. And I know myself, says Moshe Rabbeinu, I'm not going to sin with them. So what's going to be? HaKadosh Baruch Hu, at some point in the future, again, will have a thought, a havamina, maybe to destroy Am Yisrael, because he has me around. Says Moshe Rabbeinu, if that's the case, what's the benefit of Am Yisrael? The benefit of Am Yisrael is that I should not exist. Because my existence may allow HaKadosh Baruch Hu at one point in history to destroy Klal Yisrael. So if that's the case, I don't want to exist. Ve'ata, now that I understand the cheshbon of HaKadosh Baruch Hu, if that's the case, whether you forgive them or not, I don't care. I have one request of you, and that is, I don't want to be around anymore. I don't want to be in this world anymore, because my whole existence in the world is for the benefit of Klal Yisrael. And if my existence will allow HaKadosh Baruch Hu, chas v'sholom, to harm them, so I don't want to be around. And I don't want to be around, not in this world, not as a tzaddik, not as a rasha, not as a Beinoni, not in this world, not in the world to come. In other words, Mecheni misifrecha asher katafta, Moshe Rabbeinu is willing to forgo not only his place in this world, but even in the world to come, he's willing to give it up. Why? Because he's not in the game for himself. He's here for Klal Yisrael. And if his existence will allow HaKadosh Baruch Hu even to have a thought in the direction of harming Klal Yisrael, so there's no purpose for him. There's no purpose for him to be here. We find this attribute of complete devotion to Klal Yisrael, like we saw by Avram Avinu, like we saw by Aaron, like we see by Moshe Rabbeinu. We see it also by Yonah Hanavi. Right? The Medrash tells us, Yalkut Shimoni, source number 13, Rabbi Nosson Omer, Lo halach Yonah ela la'abed et atzmo bayam, shene'emar, sa'uni v'hatiluni el hayam. V'chen ata motzeh ba'avot u'banvi'im, shenatnu nafsham al Yisrael. V'moshe hu omer, v'ata im tisachat atam. Says the Medrash on this pasuk, v'ata im tisachat atam about Moshe Rabbeinu, that Yonah Hanavi behaves in the same form. Moshe Rabbeinu is willing to give up his life to protect Klal Yisrael. so too Yonah. Because HaKadosh Baruch Hu comes to Yonah and tells him, go to Nineveh. Go to Nineveh and give them Musar, because they're sinners. And Yonah knows that he's going to go to Nineveh and he'll give them Musar, and they're going to accept his Musar. They're going to listen, and they're going to do Tshuva. And what's that going to cause? If Nineveh does Tshuva, but Am Yisrael don't do Tshuva, so that's going to harm Bnei Yisrael. That's going to make them look bad. Says Yonah, I can't do that. I can't make my own brothers look bad in the eyes of HaKadosh Baruch Hu. I'm willing to give up my life and not to make Bnei Yisrael look bad. And it's interesting, we spoke before about Pinchas. And Chazal tell us that Pinchas is Eliyahu. That somehow Eliyahu Hanavi, he's the extension and the continuation of Pinchas. Pinchas was a Kanoi, Eliyahu was a Kanoi, but we know that unlike Pinchas, that was willing to protect Am Yisrael at all expense, Eliyahu didn't behave that way. And Eliyahu comes to HaKadosh Baruch Hu and he tells him, look how Bnei Yisrael are sinning, they've left your covenant, they've transgressed your bris. And HaKadosh Baruch Hu says to Eliyahu, if that's all you have to say, you have to talk bad about Am Yisrael, then I don't want you to be a Navi. And HaKadosh Baruch Hu tells Eliyahu to appoint Elisha in his place. But we know one of the stories, one of the things that Eliyahu does in his lifetime, Eliyahu, there's the story with the Isha Tzarfatit who Eliyahu lives by, and her son gets sick and she goes to call Eliyahu, and Eliyahu brings him back to life. Chazal tell us, who was that child? Ben Isha Tzarfatit. Do you know who he was? He grows up and he becomes Yonah Hanavi. So that it comes out very beautiful that even though Eliyahu Hanavi in his lifetime, he was not Melamed Zchus on Am Yisrael. And that's why he comes to the bris every time, every day throughout history. He comes to experience the bris to see how Am Yisrael are keeping the bris of HaKadosh Baruch Hu. But Eliyahu himself didn't go out of his way to protect Am Yisrael, but he brought back to life the son of the Isha Tzarfatit, who according to Chazal was Yonah Hanavi, and Yonah Hanavi fixes that, and he's willing to give up his life in order not to harm Am Yisrael. We find this also by Moshe Rabbeinu, by the Chet of Mei Meriva. Because by the Chet of Mei Meriva, Moshe Rabbeinu, everyone knows, he hits the stone, and the Torah tells us, Vayomer Hashem el Moshe vel Aaron, in source number 14, Yain lo ha'emantem bi lahakdisheni leinei bnei Yisrael, lachen lo taviu et hakahal hazeh el haaretz asher natati lahem. And Rashi tells us, what does it mean, Yain lo ha'emantem bi lahakdisheni? Says Rashi, she'ilu dibartem el hasela v'hotzi, if you would have spoken to the rock and it would have brought out water after speaking to it, so that would create a Kiddush Hashem in the eyes of Bnei Yisrael. V'omrim, they would say, Mas sela zeh sheino medaber ve'ino shomea ve'ino tzarich parnasa mekayem diburo shemakom havachomer anu. Bnei Yisrael would say, if this stone that doesn't talk and doesn't hear and doesn't need parnasa, doesn't need to eat, and even so it obeys the word of Hashem, Kal v'chomer us, Bnei Yisrael, if HaKadosh Baruch Hu tells us to do something, we have to listen. So why is it? Why did Moshe Rabbeinu not do this Kiddush Hashem? Why did he not speak to this stone? So says the Sefer Ber Moshe, Hadmor Me'ozrov, Rav Moshe Yechiel Epstein was a Rebbe in Tel Aviv, and he says, you know why Moshe Rabbeinu didn't want to speak to the stone? Because Moshe Rabbeinu knew that he's going to speak to the stone and the stone will listen. But he knows that Bnei Yisrael, they're not going to learn the lesson. And that's going to cause Bnei Yisrael to look bad in the eyes of HaKadosh Baruch Hu. And therefore he dafka hit the stone. Because also Bnei Yisrael know to listen after they're hit. They don't always listen when they're spoken to. And therefore Moshe Rabbeinu did not want to speak to the stone, because speaking the stone would make Bnei Israel look bad. And we won't go through all the sources, try to finish on time in another 5 minutes. And we'll just see the words of the Mesilas Yesharim in Perek Yutes. He says, Ki ein HaKadosh Baruch Hu ohev, ela lemi she'ohev et Yisrael. Who does HaKadosh Baruch Hu love most? Those that have tremendous love for his children, for Bnei Yisrael. V'chol ma she'adam magdil ahavato liYisrael, the more a person enhances his love to Am Yisrael, gam HaKadosh Baruch Hu magdil alav, the more HaKadosh Baruch Hu loves him. Ve'elehem haroim hamitim, these are the true shepherds, the true leaders of Am Yisrael. She'HaKadosh Baruch Hu chafetz behem harbeh, that HaKadosh Baruch Hu desires. Which leaders does Hashem desire? Those that are mosrim atzmam al tzonam. They're willing to totally be devoted, to give themselves up for their flock. They go out of their way to take care of their benefit. They're always willing to daven. They're always looking to be melamed zchus and to take care of their needs and to look out for their welfare. What is this similar to? Says the Mesilas Yesharim. Le'av she'eino ohev shum adam yoter mimishu roeh she'ohev et banav. Who does a father like? He doesn't love anyone more than the person that he sees who loves his child. V'hu davar she'ateva ya'id alav. Right? If a father comes to a parents-teachers meeting and he sits with the teacher and he sees that the teacher is going on and on how he loves your child. So the father comes out and he says, wow, what an amazing teacher. How do you know he's an amazing teacher? You saw him teach a class? You don't know anything. But as far as you're concerned, what does the father care about? He wants to know that the teacher loves his child. If you loved my child, I love you. So to HaKadosh Baruch Hu. Which leaders does HaKadosh Baruch Hu love? Those that are completely devoted for their flock. Not those that are in it for themselves. Not those that care and they're willing to give up from themselves to take care of Bnei Israel. Maybe we'll end with a story. Shlomo Carlebach tells a story about the Maggid from Kotsk, Menachem Mendel Mikotsk, and Rabbi Yitzchak Mivarka. The Kotzker and Rabbi Yitzchak Mivarka were good friends. And they made a deal, they made an agreement between them that whoever of them, as they were getting older, whichever one of them dies first, he promises that he'll come back in a dream to his living friend and he'll tell him what's happening with him in Shamayim. That was the deal that Rabbi Menachem Mendel Mikotsk made with Rabbi Yitzchak Mivarka. And the years pass, and sure enough, Rabbi Yitzchak passes on to the next world. Rabbi Yitzchak Mivarka passes away, and Rabbi Menachem Mendel Mikotsk is waiting to hear from his friend. They promised each other, whoever dies first will come in a dream and tell his friend what happened with him in Shamayim. And the days of the Shiva passed, the days of the Shloshim passed, and he hasn't received any message from his dear friend. No WhatsApp, no SMS, what's going on here? And one day he's walking in the street, the Kotzker, and he sees the son of Rav Yitzchak Mivarka. He says, listen, have you heard from your father? And he says, no. That night, the Kotzker has a dream. And in his dream, he goes up to Shamayim, to Gan Eden, and he goes to the Heichal of the Talmidei Baal Shem Tov, and he says to them, here, the Talmidei Baal Shem Tov, did you see my friend, Rabbi Yitzchak Mivarka? They said, yeah, we saw him, but he left. He's not here anymore. Where did he go? They said, try higher. Go to a higher palace in Shamayim. So he goes higher to the Baal Shem Tov himself, the Gaon Vilna, and he says to them, did you see my friend, Rabbi Yitzchak? And again, they say to him, he was here, but he left. Where did he go? Try higher. So again, he tries higher, and again, he gets the same answer, till he gets to a certain place, and they tell him, you want to see him? Go outside, you'll see a forest. Pass the forest, and you'll see a big river. There, at the edge of the river, you'll see your friend, Rabbi Yitzchak. He goes out, he passes the forest, He goes to the river, and there at the other side of the river, he sees Rav Yitzchak, who's standing with his stick, leaning on his stick, staring at the water. And he says to him, Rav Yitzchak, what are you doing here? And he says, I'm not leaving, I'm not moving from this water. And he says to him, what is this water? He says, this water, these are the tears that Am Yisrael has to shed until Mashiach comes. And I said to HaKadosh Baruch Hu, I'm not willing to go into my Gan Eden. I'm not willing to enjoy my place in the world to come until you don't come and dry out this river of tears. That's a leader who's willing to forgo his place in the world to come because of his love and tremendous his tremendous love and the way he looks out for Klal Yisrael. We daven 3 times a day. Hashiva shaftenu kevarishona v'yatzenu kevatchila v'aser mimenu yagon manacha. We daven that HaKadosh Baruch Hu should give us leaders that are concerned with one thing, the welfare of Klal Yisrael, and that will save us from much suffering. Haser mimenu yagon manacha. If we, in our lives, we try to follow this path of looking out for those around us, that will be a tikkun for the chet of sinas chinam, and we should be zoche for binyan bayis shlishi b'mehera b'yameinu, and we should be able to join together in Beit HaMikdash b'mehera b'yameinu. Amen v'amen. Thank you very much.
Yeah.
Shkoyach.